Ladies and gents, welcome back to another video. In front of me here is a package with an iPad mini inside. Specifically, this should be an iPad mini 4th generation, and I believe it's still running iOS 9, which is what it shipped with when it came out in 2015. So let's get this thing opened up, see what kind of condition it's in, and find out if we have ourselves a 4th gen mini on iOS 9. Let's begin. All right, here's the iPad mini. It's in fairly rough condition. The display is super dirty, and I don't know what's going on down here. There's like metal filings or shavings. I don't know if you guys can see that on camera. I don't know if that's on the glass. It feels like it's under the glass. That's very strange. It's also on this side as well. I'm not sure what that is. That's kind of weird. The back is in good condition. This is in the silver color with the white front bezels. Let's see if it has any power. Usually iPads retain their battery life much better than iPhones, but I'm gonna get a charger just in case, and then I'm gonna get this cleaned up while we let it boot. All right, the front actually cleaned up pretty nicely, except for these spots down here at the bottom. Really not sure what that is. It is not wiping off. Really lost for words here. I'm not sure what's going on. I can't imagine it's like metal shavings, but the bottom metal is rather dented, so something to do with that. All right, enough talk. Here is our menu. You can see we do have the slide to set up, and that means that this is hopefully iOS 9. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and go through the setup here. Hopefully there's no iOS 9 activation problems like we have on the iPhone 6s and the iPhone SE. We'll see what happens here. Now I believe this has the A8 CPU, so I don't think it's gonna have the activation problems that we see with the A9 CPU on iOS 9. Okay, very good. That worked. Now let's see, is Touch ID working? And it is. So let me go ahead and fly through this setup, and once we get to the home screen, we will figure out which version of iOS we've got. All right, and here we are. This does look like iOS 9. Of course, we've got the iOS 9 stock wallpaper. Let's head into settings here and see which version we've got. All right, so 9.3.1, so a pretty late version of iOS 9. This is a 16 gigabyte iPad mini, so just the bare minimum there on storage. There's obviously no iCloud account, and there's no battery health on the iPads. So very cool to get a device like this. There is more stuff up here on the display. I don't know, can you guys see that at the top here? Right there, those two spots will not come off the display. Some interesting stuff going on here. I would say that maybe the glass has been replaced, but I really don't think it has because the LCD and the glass are fused together on the 4th gen mini, and the LCD does look like it is original just based on how it's displaying the colors. So very cool to get a device like this. Let's talk a little bit about the history here for the 4th gen mini. Now this replaced the 3rd gen mini, which was basically just a 2nd gen iPad mini with the addition of Touch ID, but this one kind of redesigned it. I think we made the mini a lot thinner here with the 4th gen, and we removed the mute lock switch there, so that's gone. And this basically just looks like an iPad Air 2nd gen shrunken down. And the internals are fairly similar, although there are some differences, and let's talk about them. So if you remember, the iPad Air 2nd gen launched with a tri-core CPU. Now that is a 1.5 gigahertz, and that's the A8X chip. And that's paired with 2 gigabytes of memory. And that's the only time Apple's ever used a 3-core CPU. Now you would think, well, the iPad mini should get that same thing because they're so similar devices, but that actually was not the case. This mini launched with the standard A8 chip, the one found in the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, but it was clocked faster at 1.5 gigahertz, and it was paired with 2 gigabytes of memory, up from just 1 gigabyte on the iPhone models. Now this gives us a really good opportunity to talk about the importance of memory and why Apple really dropped the ball on a lot of their older products. So this has the same CPU as the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, but with double the memory. What does that mean? That means that this thing got 3 more years of iOS updates. So while the 6 and the 6 Plus ended on iOS 12, this thing got iOS 13, 14, and 15. And that's where this thing finished its support. So it started on iOS 9 and it got all the way through iOS 15. So a very good run for the iPad mini 4th gen. So even though they share the same processor, same GPU and everything, that extra gigabyte of RAM allowed this thing to continue its iOS support for 3 extra years. That is very substantial, and I think it goes to show the importance of memory, especially in iOS devices back when Apple was being very stingy with the amount of RAM that they put inside of their products. So that said, this thing launched in September of 2015, and it was discontinued in March of 2019. So this was sold for like 3.5 years, and it had a pretty good run. Now this was available in 16, 32, 64, and 128 gigabytes of storage. You could get it in silver, which is what we have here, space gray, and gold. It's a 7.9-inch display. It is a Retina display, and like we mentioned earlier, it is a laminated glass panel, so there's really no space between the glass and the LCD underneath it. iPhones have had that for a long time, and this was the first time the iPad mini got that feature, so a very welcomed change for this display. It's not the brightest display, but it does get 450 nits. It's a 60 hertz panel, and I don't know if there's True Tone. Let's check that out. This is actually the first time I've ever owned an iPad mini 4th gen, and it looks like there is not True Tone here. Not sure when that was introduced, maybe on the 5th gen mini, and I think it's definitely there on the 6th and 7th gen minis. Now this mini does have an upgraded camera, so it's got the same lens as the iPad Air 2nd gen, so that's an 8 megapixel lens. That is an upgrade from the 5 megapixel lens that was in the previous generation iPad minis. And what we can do, we can go ahead and fire up the camera here. It's gonna be 1080p at 30 FPS, but I can show you guys how that looks and sounds. And we're gonna switch over to that iPad mini right now. So here we are on the iPad mini. I apologize because it's probably going to be fairly shaky compared to my main setup here. There's no optical image stabilization here on the iPad mini. We do get tap to focus, so I am able to use that. Here we've got an iPhone 4S down here, and I feel like this lens is really zoomed in. I'm holding this at the same distance as my iPhone right now, and you can see how short the field of vision is on this device. Hopefully it sounds okay. If not, I'll just have to edit in the microphone that I use for my main setup. But there is a look and a listen at the iPad mini 4th gen's 8 megapixel lens. So with that said, we'll go ahead and switch back here to the main setup. All right, there you guys got to see and hear how this mini sounds. It is probably not the best experience, especially being 1080p, 30 FPS. I record almost all my videos at 4K 60, so a big drop in quality there, and I'm sure the sound's not going to be as good either. So this is pretty cool to get an iPad mini here on iOS 9. This one's never been updated. So the iPad mini's always been an interesting lineup. Apple introduced it as really the budget option back in 2012 alongside the iPad 4th gen, and they've continued updating it, although at a slower pace compared to the flagship models. It's kind of left behind, and I'm not sure how popular it is anymore. Apple did just update the mini to get the A17 Pro chip, which is the one found in the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max. That enables it to get Apple Intelligence. This thing is way far behind, but that's okay. The reason we got this was for the iOS 9 experience here. Now, real quick before we go, let's check out the iOS 9 wallpapers. There are some decent ones, but not quite as cool as the iOS 7 and 8. So we got some very basic ones down here. I do think that looks nice. Let's see what the other options are. A lot of dark ones here. I don't think that looks as good on the white bezel devices. Of course, we've got the classic iOS 9 wallpaper. There's something about this, it just looks special. I don't know if it's because it's so hard to get iOS 9 devices. That's not like an iPad 2nd or 3rd gen or an iPhone 4S, but it's very cool to see that, especially on a Retina display. So that's pretty neat. All right, I think that's gonna go ahead and wrap up this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this look here at an iPad mini 4th gen running iOS 9 here in 2024. Almost 10 years since this thing came out. Still a beautiful device in a very iconic design. This has been a look at the iPad mini 4th gen. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in another one of my videos.